This is a topic that I really do wish that we had more time to discuss at City Council. For those who are familiar with the city, you'll recognize that we've just launched our budget process. And with that launch comes two budgets, an operating budget as well as a capital budget. And so we will be mired in debates, and some of these debates will sort of float to the headlines of many of our daily newspapers, and oftentimes the language that you will find that comes out of the debates and comes out of the discourse is Toronto is in a financial crisis, and that the things that we want, the things that we need, those are the services and the infrastructure, whether it's human, hard, or soft. Those type of services are not affordable because we don't have enough money, or in this case, what we call revenues. You know, it's a real honor for me to be here to address your distinguished group. I recognize that there's probably a number of lawyers and economists in the audience, and those who are just very keenly interested in public finance. What I find very encouraging is that this discussion is taking place. What I find somewhat discouraging at times is how difficult it is to unpack the information that we have in order for us to get more people active and engaged. And certainly that is one of the struggles that I've had as a local city councillor, elected in 2010, who is a public banking advocate. I strongly believe and firmly believe that this is an important fundamental question to the overall health of not just our city, but our nation. In 2011, shortly after I got elected, I was asked by the National Post to come up with solutions. How would you solve Toronto's financial crisis? And I'm going to put financial crisis always in these scary quotations. And so I gave them an answer, and they were canvassing all city councillors. They were just saying, all you city councillors, there are 44 of you, how would you individually solve Toronto's financial crisis? And so I gave them a couple of suggestions, but the one idea that I put forward that seemed to have gotten more interest than others was the proposition to create a Toronto-owned, a municipal-owned bank. And so the journalist said, no one has brought that up before. And I said, well, is it worth a further discussion? Are you interested in letting me write an opinion piece? And they said, let me get back to my editor and we'll get back to you. So the editor said, sure, we'll let this rookie counselor take a stab at what she thinks public banking is about. And so I penned a 1,200-word essay with my colleague and collaborator, Stephen James Kerr, and we put forth the proposition of whether or not Toronto should have its own public bank. And why should we do that, besides the fact that we are a major financial powerhouse in North America. We're one of the biggest banking centers in the continent. The fact that we already know how banking systems work, why should we take the funds that we collect through taxes, user fees, utility charges, and what have you, and capitalize one of the biggest banks, and we have contracts with a couple of them, capitalize their accounts, and then when we need money, we go cap in hand back to them and say, you know all that money we just gave you to capitalize your accounts and your reserves, we're going to need to borrow that back at interest rates. And we're going to pay you the principal plus the interest. How smart are we? So the proposition was like, can we not create our city-owned bank in order for us to take financial control back in-house? So we don't have to pay extraordinary interest rates for the services, for the infrastructure that we need in order to build a city that's livable and affordable for everyone. So, interestingly enough, that article got me into a pot of hot boiling water, because economists who oftentimes are under contract with right-wing think tanks came out from the woodwork, and they all jumped on top of this article saying, she doesn't know what she's talking about. And the attacks were not on the merits of the idea, ironically enough. They were just on my qualifications of what does she know about banking. So it led me to unravel, and it led me to reveal the unraveling of how this discussion can get you deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, and that there is a huge financial interest on the opposite side, the one that does not serve the public interest, that does not want us to have this very important crucial conversation. And so I have been on a bit of a personal quest and journey, and I recognize that my friends from COMER has really led the charge. I'm a little bit late to the party. But I think that a lot of individuals are very keenly interested in public finance. They don't know how to begin the conversation. It is heavy stuff, and it's kind of intimidating. So I did bring the article that I wrote. I'm going to leave some copies if you're interested in taking a look at it. But I went to Mayor Ford, and I said to Mayor Ford, you and I have more in common than you possibly think. You're interested in reducing the burden on the taxpayer, so am I. And let me put forward an idea that I think that can get us there if we both back it. Because I think that some of our best allies in public finance reform are actually on the conservative side of the political spectrum. The ones who are not beholden to big bank and big corporate interests, right? The ones who are just true fiscal conservatives. And so I brought this idea to him, and he said, well, you know, whatever. And it kind of drowned into a non-conversation. But that did not deter me, because what I know that I saw in his eyes when I brought this forward was, I like the idea of reducing the burden on the taxpayer. That was what he got out of the conversation. He just didn't know how to make it work for his political support base. So I then took the proposition and said, you know what, I can't get what I need here at City Council. And I did speak to our senior finance staff and said, if I moved a motion on the floor of Council and asked you to report back on the feasibility of whether or not Toronto can create its own financial institution, 100% of the shares owned by the City of Toronto, will you support this? And the finance staff said, well, Councillor, we already are a great we already can manage our financial houses. It's also important to note, Councillor, that we can borrow money at competitive rates. And I said to them, we're borrowing from the same banks that we're capitalizing their reserves with, our revenue dollars, right? They said, yes, Councillor, but it's never been done before. We issue bonds. Institutional buyers will purchase those bonds and give us a modest interest rate. So we don't need we don't need public banking at the city level. Besides, Councillor, is this even legal? Can this be done? And I said, who are the lawmakers? Government, federal, provincial, municipal. If it is not legal, we're in the best position to make it legal. Yeah. Why would we turn over the power of credit creation to private interests? Why would we allow the Bank of Canada to abdicate its responsibility to itself, the country, to the province, and to the city? Why is it now that we are facing an $86 million shortfall in the city's $11.5 billion operating budget, and my mayor has to go to my premier to negotiate some emergency dollars? And how is it, this is so important, how is it that the province's proposition is, we will issue you up to a $200 million loan at competitive low interest rates, so you can plug the financial gap in your budget, and we will secure that money with corporate city assets? And how will the province get that up to $200 million loan? In this case, it's a line of credit. And what are the terms? Where are they going to get the money from? Because they're broke. So the details are not out yet. If you're following the newspapers and the articles, please do, and make sure you comment. They love reading the comment sections, those editors. All the newspapers comb through the comment section, because sometimes in the comment section is where some of the best ideas come from. It's also where some of the hate mail comes from. But I do think it's worthwhile to make sure that if you are an advocate for financial reforms on the public side, is that we have to get our voices out. So we don't know what the terms are. All we know right now is that Mayor Tory is interested in accepting those terms to be determined. And we know that the Minister of Finance, Charles Sousa, has said, this is your solution forward. How sustainable is that? To borrow from your credit card, to pay for your groceries, to produce the meal, you're either paying later, which is the case, or you're asking for us to raise taxes further down the road. It's not sustainable. It's not good financial management. I went to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities in 2012, because I didn't get anywhere at City Hall. Public finance staff said, we're probably not going to be able to give you the right answer that you're looking for, Councillor. You can ask us, but you may not get what you're looking for. But we really like the idea, and it deserves to be further explored, but we don't really know how to tackle it. Ironically enough, after my article came out in 2011 in the National Post, I started to hear from economists. And economists and professors of the economy, professors of law, investment bankers who run private banks in the Cayman Islands. It's interesting, because they came to me asking for private meetings, including major executives of the big 5 banks. And they said, so Councillor, what are you talking about? And the conversation broke out into 2 pieces, and I found this to be the most interesting part of it all. From the private banking side, they want to know, where are you going with this? How far are you going? And of course I said, oh, I don't know, I'm just asking a question. I really don't know the answer, maybe you can help me out. So I was a little bit nervous to know why these big executives were all of a sudden at my doorstep asking me these tough questions of, where are you going with this? The other interested persons who came to me, including investment bankers who run offshore banks, and including economists and professors of law and economy, said, you're on the right track. Keep going. The folks who run the investment banks offshore said, we're never going record to let people know that we told you to keep investigating, to keep studying this matter, but you're on the right track, which tells me that COMER and the advocates in this room and those who are interested in public banking, public finance reform, you're on the right track. And I think you know the incredible obstacle, whether it's political or otherwise, that you will be facing as you knock on those doors, as you ask those crucial questions, as Mr. Galati, Rocco Galati, who I have the utmost respect for, decides to take this on to a constitutional challenge. It is probably one of the most important discussions that we will have in our nation, is why is it that the Minister of Finance that holds 100% of the shares of the Bank of Canada in his charge, why will he not allow the Bank of Canada to do the work that it needs to do, which is to provide publicly financed loans to other orders of government, including the City of Toronto, so we can build the city and the neighborhoods that we want? It is the most important question. Because in 2001, the City of Toronto, I wasn't here yet, but the City of Toronto did exactly the same thing. I'm going to read you a resolution. Loans from the Bank of Canada. Actually, I have to do this. Okay. The Policy and Finance Committee, this is a standing committee, or this was the name of the standing committee here at the City, recommends that the Minister of Finance, in conjunction with the Province of Ontario, be requested to provide low-cost, below prime, long-term loans to municipalities, such as through the Bank of Canada, and a copy of this request be forwarded to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. So in 2001, the city was already on this conversation, along the trajectory. And it just so happened in 2001, there was all sorts of debates about the Scarborough subway system, because Mayor Lastman at that time was trying to find ways to fund the Scarborough subway system. All that being said, it is not a new conversation. And as you can tell, 13 years later, we're still talking about the Scarborough subway system to the chagrin of many in the room and across the city. And we're still having the same discussion about whether or not we can finance the infrastructure that we need. in order for us to connect the city from east to west, north and south. This is very, very important. I'm just going to finish off with one final comment. I think most of you are probably aware of the postal banking conversation that has begun in the U.S. So I've been tracking that very closely because I'm just a bit of a geek that way. I kind of love this stuff. And I recognize that there was a committee that was tasked to find alternative revenue solutions for Canada Post. And so they undertook a 3-year review with consultants and said, let's explore all the ways we can diversify our revenues for Canada Post so we can keep this Crown Corporation sustainable, viable, financially viable. Because there is competition coming in from the private sector. You know who they are. Whether it's UPS or FedEx, things are changing. How we purchase our goods and services are changing. So therefore, we also need to adapt. And there was a small little news agency in Ottawa called Blacklock's Reporter. And you have to subscribe to them and you have to pay to them. I read their article, which first said there was this report, three years in the making, and that this report was produced 800 pages. And I actually have a copy of this report. What was so interesting to me is when I connected with the reporters in Ottawa and said, so you just found out this obscure little bit of information, and who's going to pick this up across the country? Because there's news feeds going back and forth, and many of those major newspapers subscribe to Blacklock's Reporter. So here's the report, produced by Canada Post, commissioned by them themselves, over 800 pages, all outlining the various ways that they can fix their financial problems, diversify their revenue sources. Out of the 800 pages, 701 pages are redacted. Now, I find this absolutely fascinating, because out of 800 pages, 701 pages are redacted, and I can only imagine, what are you hiding? So I put all this out there before you because this conversation is very important. For those who buried this report and who redacted this report, who did not let Canada Post, and in this way, as a Crown Corporation, try to find a way to be sustainable, I would almost call this an act of treason. This is a Crown Corporation. Is it any different than, dare I say, dismantling a gas line or putting poisons into our lake? Canada Post, in many ways, provides a service that connects this country. We have neighborhoods and we have communities, many times very small. Those small communities are bound together by a few infrastructure pieces, as I see it. They all have a hardware store, right? They have a grocery store, they have a pharmacy, and they have the postal office. And many of the big banks, if they weren't in those communities providing banking services, financial services, then they're certainly not going back in to provide them now. And we are seeing those large banking interests consolidate, and they're leaving those communities. So Canada Post has a role. They can evolve into something more than they are today. We're already using them to transfer and wire money. Why can we not allow postal banking, or the discussion of whether or not postal banking is a viable option for Canada Post to happen in an honest and transparent way? What are they hiding? So thank you very much, everyone, for allowing me to be here. I really do value the conversation you're going to have. Unfortunately, I will not be able to join you for the entire seminar, but I do think that what is being said today, I'm glad to see it's being recorded. I hope that we can learn and come up with a strategy on how to make sure that this information is going to be accessible to a wider range of audience, because it's really difficult to unpack in the fashion that I've even tried to unpack it, but it's even more difficult to try to get more and more people involved and engaged, because it really is that crucial conversation. So thank you very much.